When it comes to famous gardens, you obviously have the Garden of Eden, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, and now, the Gorlak Garden. Never have I spent so much time and effort on such a pointless and mildly disappointing project. It all began when I embarked to the foothills of some mountains on the outskirts of my empire, looking to build a bunch of cage traps so that I could do something with some captured creatures. A tournament, a breeding program, a $1 million exotic pet business, that kind of thing. But the interesting animals I was trying to track down, all the different types of beasts the game has to offer, never materialized because my civilization never bothered to send a single migrant my way. And so the population could only grow when performance troops made up of goblins or elves decided to kick up their feet and set up shop for a while, which is not a good way to hit population triggers. Despite our paltry population, I continued with my plan to build cage traps and lure creatures into captivity. For a couple years, I watched over our traps as we hauled in a wandering troll, the occasional ogre, and swarm after swarm of troglodytes. As this went on, I began to feel like there was nothing I could do with these creatures, beyond pitting the troll and one of the ogres against one another in a battle to the death. But then I saw the brilliant bald head and mammoth tusks of a gorlak get caught in one of the traps. Much like the dwarves who prize gorlaks for their stimulating conversation and helpful guidance, the sight of that noble creature inspired me and immediately set me on a new path to build a garden for all my gorlaks. 2 more were trapped soon after the first, to live in. First we dug out a space below the bottom floor of the fortress, smoothed the whole thing, and then set up an entire glass industry just to separate out the viewing area from the rest of the garden. Bare stone doesn't just spontaneously grow cave moss, underlichen, or floor fungus though, so I had to come up with a way to muddy the floors. We had no river on the surface, and our ponds were pitiful, so I was forced to settle for the most labor-intensive option, building a 50-story tall pump stack to pull water out of the first cavern layer. It took a year and a half to produce and assemble all the parts in the right configuration, and we lost 2 dwarves to silly accidents along the way, but once it was finished, we were free to flood the garden. I wasn't sure whether to completely cover the ground with piles of mud or leave it as just a dusting, but in my head it seemed like, when it comes to growing stuff, the more mud the merrier, so I flooded the garden over and over again until the surface was smooth. But while it seemed like everything was in place, and my gorlaks were enjoying themselves splashing around in the mud, nothing grew. For a year, I watched over the garden as nothing happened, and was mystified, until I was scrolling through the fortress, and discovered that the drainage area 10 floors below the garden was filling up with all the mosses I wanted. Apparently, smoothing the floor of the garden had been a bad idea. So I recaptured the gorlaks, dug the entire garden down a level, built some rooms for the gorlaks to explore, and activated my pump stack to begin the flooding process once again. But it turned out that I had drained the lake in the cavern the first time around, and so I had to search around the caves for a new water source, and connect the new pond with the old lake before I could finally flood the garden, properly this time. Immediately, moss began appearing under the water and mud, and I could free my gorlaks once again so that they could enjoy the garden as it grew. For the next decade, I left the garden to grow, moss is really slow, and spent my time reading a book, and watching as my gorlaks injured themselves falling off the observation area windows, and fell into deep, immobilizing depressions. One of them even dropped dead due to sheer emotional turmoil. By the time the garden was fully filled with fungi, it had real polar bear enclosure at the zoo during the summer vibes. But hey, people pay money to see those bears, and the citizens of my fortress got to watch the gorlaks for free. This wasn't exactly what I was imagining success would look like when I first embarked, but sometimes life gives you no migrants and a pack of gorlaks, and you just have to roll with the punches for 20 years. Thanks for watching, an extra thank you to those of you who support me on Patreon, and I'll see you next time.